Hey guys, tonight, we begin with ... A number. Not a sword, not a crown, not even a scandalous love affair, but a number. And not just any number. A body count. Yeah, I know you hear the phrase body count today, and your mind probably jumps straight to dating gossip, right? But trust me, the medieval version, oh, it's way worse. Forget Tinder swipes and awkward DMIs. In the Middle Ages, a body count could literally mean how many heads rolled at your command, or how many peasants you could burn through in a single afternoon. Now picture this. You're standing in the middle of a muddy medieval square, the smell of roasted meat mixing with horse dung. People shouting in 5 different dialects that you can't understand. To your left, there's a guy with no teeth selling what looks like soup, but is actually just hot water with turnip chunks. To your right, there's a drunk monk who definitely shouldn't be drinking, but hey, that's the Middle Ages for you. And in the center, a stage. Not for theater, for executions. Because if you were alive back then, your entertainment wasn't Netflix. It was watching your neighbor's cousin get his tongue nailed to a post for stealing a chicken, and the ruler sitting on the throne. He was keeping score. That was his body count. And let me tell you something, some of those rulers, they had numbers so high, even modern war criminals would be like, whoa, bro, maybe tone it down a little. But here's the fun part. No one ever tells you why these rulers were so obsessed with killing. Was it just power? Was it fear? Was it boredom? And here's where it gets juicy. Was it something much darker, buried deep in their culture, their psychology, and their idea of legacy? See, medieval rulers didn't think about body counts the way we do. For them, it wasn't about numbers. It was about making the kind of statement that echoed through history. If you wiped out a rival family and had their heads displayed on spikes along the city walls, that wasn't cruelty. That was branding. That was PR. That was your medieval LinkedIn update. And here's the part that'll really fry your brain. Some of the biggest body counts in history weren't even from wars. Nope, they came from feasts gone wrong. Religious purifications, and get this, drunken dares. I'm not joking. Imagine dying because your king decided, after his 10th goblet of wine, that he wanted to see how many prisoners could fit into a single pit before it overflowed. But before we get lost in the gore, and don't worry, we're absolutely going there, I want you to sit with this idea. Body counts in the Middle Ages weren't just about death. They were about control. And in a time when plague, famine, and bandits could wipe you out overnight, rulers learned that the quickest way to keep order was through terror. Fear was currency, and the kings, queens, popes, and warlords, they were billionaires in fear. So let me ask you, my friend, if you were alive back then, if you were standing in that mud-soaked square with me, watching blood drip into the straw, could you look up at the man on the throne and not wonder how many lives he'd already taken? Could you resist the temptation to count? Because that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to count. We're going to look at the medieval rulers who didn't just dabble in cruelty, but made it an art form. We're going to uncover the hidden stories, the ones history books like to brush aside because they're too messy, too scandalous, or too unbelievable. We're going to walk into feasting halls where laughter turned into massacre, into castles where prisoners scratched tally marks into stone walls just to keep track of who'd disappeared, and into monasteries where even the holy men were hiding skeletons, literally. And here's a little warning. Once you start looking at medieval body counts, you realize something unsettling. The line between legendary king and psychopath with a crown is razor thin. And sometimes, the only difference is who wrote the chronicle afterward. So tonight, I want you to do more than just listen. I want you to imagine. I want you to feel the damp stone of the dungeon under your fingertips, the iron stench of blood in the air, the hushed whispers of people too scared to speak their king's name out loud. I want you to walk beside me into a world where survival depended on how many people your ruler was willing to kill in a single breath. And trust me, once you hear some of these numbers, you'll never look at the phrase, body count, the same way again. Because next, we're going to start with one of the craziest medieval rulers you've probably never heard of. A man whose obsession with death wasn't just about killing enemies, it was about turning murder into a performance. A show a statement so brutal that even his allies started wondering if he was possessed by something not entirely human. And here's the kicker. You've probably walked past his legacy without even realizing it. Statues, coins, even nursery rhymes. He's been hiding in plain sight. But if you want to know who he is, well, you're going to have to step into section 2. Because that's where the real counting begins. Okay, so you survived Peter. You stomached Vlad. Congratulations, you're officially knee-deep in medieval nightmare fuel. But now, my friend, things are about to get disturbingly fun. And I don't mean fun as in juggling at a village fair. I mean fun as in, imagine someone so powerful, so untouchable, that they treated killing like their version of bowling night. I'm talking about Charles VI of France, though honestly, by the end of this, you'll be calling him something closer to Charles, the psychopath now. History books politely call him Charles the Mad, which sounds quirky, almost adorable, like he just forgot to wear pants to council meetings. But no, this guy's madness had a body count, and the scariest part, half the time no one knew what version of Charles was going to show up, the paranoid killer, or the fragile king sobbing in a corner. Let me paint you the picture. Paris, late 14th century, the 100 Years' War is chewing France apart. England's breathing down their necks. Nobles are fighting each other. Peasants are starving. What France needed was a stable, level-headed ruler. What they got? A man who, on more than one occasion, forgot he was king. Literally. He once insisted he was made of glass and might shatter if someone touched him too hard. Cute, right? Until you realize this glass king also liked to take sudden breaks from reality by killing people. There's this infamous moment in 1392. Charles is leading his army through the forest, standard royal duty, right? But suddenly, he snaps. Convinced his own knights are plotting against him, he pulls out his sword and starts hacking at his companions, slashing, stabbing. By the time his frenzy stops, several loyal men are dead on the ground, bleeding out in the dirt. Number. Trial, no warning. Just boom, king goes berserk. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so he had an episode. Tragic, but not exactly serial killer material. Oh, but Charles wasn't done. His reign spiraled into a circus of paranoia, where any one noble peasant, servant could suddenly be accused of betrayal and find themselves on the chopping block. And here's where it gets extra medieval weird. Charles didn't just snap in private. Sometimes, he turned his madness into court entertainment. You've probably heard of masquerade balls, right? Fancy nobles in masks, dancing, drinking, pretending they weren't 2 missed harvests away from starvation. Well, Charles decided to spice up one of these parties. In 1393, he and 5 buddies, dressed up as wild men, covered head to toe in pitch and feathers. Great idea, except during the dance, one of the torches got too close. Whoosh. Instant inferno. Imagine being a guest at that ball. You're sipping wine, watching the king prance around in a furry costume. And then suddenly the entire royal dance troupe is screaming and burning alive. 4 men roasted to death on the spot. The king barely survived. This event went down in history as the Bal des Ardents, the Ball of the Burning Men. Now, was this mass death intentional? Probably not. But the fact that a king thought fireproof cosplay was a good idea. That's the kind of reckless insanity that leaves bodies in its wake. But here's the chilling part. Charles's unpredictability created a court where people disappeared constantly. Some whispered he ordered killings during his black moods. Others said nobles used his madness as a smokescreen, murdering rivals, and then shrugging. What can I say? The king's unwell? Either way, bodies piled up, and the people, they couldn't do a thing about it. Their king was untouchable even if he was literally frothing at the mouth, raving about invisible enemies. Now, I want you to imagine this with me. You're a courtier in medieval Paris. You've been summoned to the king's presence. You walk into the hall. Charles is there, pale, twitching, eyes darting like a trapped animal. 1 second, he's weeping, begging you not to shatter his fragile glass body. The next second, his sword is at your throat. Your fate depends on whatever chemical storm is raging in his brain that day. That's not leadership. That's Russian roulette with a crown. But here's the messed up twist: France didn't collapse under him. Why? Because his madness, his cruelty, his bloody entertainments were wrapped up and justified by the system around him. Chroniclers softened the details. Nobles whispered about demons or curses. Peasants shrugged. What could they do? The king was God's chosen. If he wanted to kill for fun, well, maybe that was divine will. And here's the thought I want you to chew on. How many of Charles's victims never made it into the records? How many people were snuffed out in a random fit, their deaths lost in the fog of royal madness? Because if a king kills you during a psychotic break, does history even bother writing down your name? That, my friend, is the cruelest kind of body count. The invisible one. Now, you might be thinking Vlad's impaled forests were worse. At least his victims were seen, remembered, feared. But Charles, he left shadows. He left people vanishing into the cracks of his madness. And in some ways, that's scarier. But don't get too comfortable, because while Charles killed in fits of insanity, the next figure on our list killed with chilling precision. No madness, no frenzy, just cold, systematic elimination of anyone who stood in his way. He didn't see killing as survival or spectacle, or entertainment. He saw it as housekeeping. And once you hear his name, you'll realize just how high a medieval body count could go when it was paired with ruthless, calculating logic. Hey guys, tonight we begin with something so unsettling, it almost feels unreal. A culture where blood wasn't just spilled, was demanded, sanctified, and glorified. Forget Vlad's impalements, or Elizabeth's torture chambers. This time, the body count wasn't the shameful secret of a mad ruler. It was the heartbeat of an empire. I'm talking about the Aztec Empire now. Pause. You might be thinking, wait, weren't we talking about medieval Europe? Yes, but here's the twist. Medieval wasn't just happening in Europe. While knights were clanging swords in castles, and kings were losing their minds in dungeons. Across the ocean, another world was living out its own version of the Middle Ages, and their definition of power was painted in blood. So let's set the scene. It's the 15th century, Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital shining like a jewel in the middle of a lake. Imagine it. Towering temples, marketplaces buzzing with traders, canals full of canoes. By European standards, it was a marvel, bigger and more organized than most European cities. But at the heart of it all stood something that made even the bravest warrior tremble. The Templo Mayor. The Great Temple. And at the top of that temple, death. You see, the Aztecs believed the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world. And because of that, humans owed them repayment. Not in gold, not in prayers, not in words, but in blood. Human hearts. Human lives. And here's where the body count gets medieval on a scale Europe could barely imagine. Take the reign of Moctezuma I in 1487. During the dedication of the rebuilt Great Temple of Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs threw a celebration. But this wasn't your usual ribbon-cutting ceremony. According to sources, thousands of captives were sacrificed over the course of just 4 days. Picture it, priests lined up, knives flashing, hearts ripped from chests, bodies rolling down the steps like macabre offerings, Spanish chroniclers claimed. As many as 80,000 victims were killed in that single event. Now historians today debate that number, arguing it was probably exaggerated. Maybe it was only 20,000. But even then, think about it. 20,000 people. In one festival. That's not just cruelty. That's industrialized ritual. Slaughter. And here's the thing. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't shameful. It was sacred. The people gathered to watch. They believed the sun wouldn't rise without this blood, that the crops wouldn't grow, the rains wouldn't fall. The world itself would collapse into darkness unless human hearts fed the gods. Imagine standing in that crowd. You, watching from the base of the temple. The drums pounding in your chest. The smell of incense thick in the air. And then the smell of blood. The priests chanting. The screams of captives echoing across the city. And every heart ripped out wasn't just death. It was salvation. For them it wasn't murder. It was keeping the universe alive. Now compare that to Europe. Vlad impaled people to terrify his enemies. Elizabeth tortured girls in secret, for Her vanity, Ivan killed out of paranoia. But the Aztecs, they killed because their entire worldview demanded it. Their cruelty wasn't a symptom of madness, it was devotion. And the scale, el mosque, unimaginable. Some estimates suggest that, in the century before the Spanish conquest, hundreds of thousands of people were sacrificed across the empire. Wars weren't just fought for territory, they were fought to capture prisoners for sacrifice. They called them the Flower Wars. Romantic name, right? But those wars weren't about conquering cities. They were about harvesting human bodies for the altar. And here's the chilling detail. Sometimes, the victims went willingly. Think about that. Some captives, raised in this belief system, walked up the steps of the temple, knowing their heart would be cut out, and believed it was an honor. Imagine a faith so strong you'd willingly die. Not for a kingdom, not for a king, but for the rising of the sun itself. But of course not everyone went willingly. Many were dragged, screaming, bound in ropes, forced up those bloody stairs. And in that moment, staring at the stone knife, they knew their world was ending. So here's the FOMO kicker. When you think about medieval body counts, who do you think is darker? Vlad, the man who made forests of corpses. Elizabeth, who turned killing into her own twisted spa treatment. Or the Aztecs, who made human sacrifice the cornerstone of civilization itself. Because here's the thought that gnaws at me. Cruelty in Europe was madness, paranoia, or obsession. Cruelty in the Aztec world, it was order, it was structure, it was the divine law. And that raises the most chilling question of all. Which is scarier when killing is chaotic, unpredictable, and insane? Or when it's organized, systematized, and everyone agrees it's the right thing to do? That's the line we just crossed, my friend. And if you thought ritual sacrifice was the peak of medieval horror, buckle up, because, in the next section, we're going back to Europe. To a ruler whose cruelty wasn't sacred, but theatrical. Someone who didn't just kill people, but staged death as if it were entertainment. Because believe me, the medieval stage wasn't always filled with jesters and plays. Sometimes, it was painted red. Hey guys, tonight we begin with a ruler who didn't just measure power in land or gold. He measured it in corpses. And not the quiet kind either. No, these weren't silent graves tucked away under mossy stones. These were spectacles. Open performances. The kind of horror that made peasants clutch their rosaries and nobles rethink their loyalty now. You and I both know medieval monarchs weren't exactly gentle souls. Mercy wasn't exactly their strong suit, but this guy, he turned cruelty into a form of governance, like the medieval version of HR policy, except, instead of a write-up, you got your head spiked on a city wall. Imagine living in a kingdom where the morning commute included dodging dripping skulls. Yeah, you'd probably keep your taxes paid on time. But let's pause here, because the important thing isn't just the gore. It's the psychology. What makes a king or any human decide that the best way to maintain order is to pile up bodies like firewood? This wasn't random sadism. This was theater. A living billboard of fear, screaming, obey, or you'll be the next prop in my little horror play. Picture it. You're walking through the market square, haggling for bread, when a cart rolls by stacked high with corpses. Everyone stops. No one speaks. The smell is a language of its own. That stench of iron and rot says more than 100 royal decrees. And right there, fear burrows under your skin. You don't question the king again. Not because he's strong, not because he's rich, but because you've seen what happens to those who step out of line. And here's the dark genius: you can't measure this body, count the way. We tally soldiers after battle. These weren't nameless enemies. These were neighbors, fellow villagers, maybe even a cousin you just had dinner with last week. Each death wasn't just about ending a life. It was about planting terror like a seed in the minds of the living. Now, let's be clear. Medieval rulers needed fear. They didn't have surveillance cameras or police patrol cars. Their version of law enforcement was a screaming man being boiled alive in the town square. Efficient, brutal, but yes, humane, not even close. And this particular king, let's call him the collector of skulls, perfected it. His throne wasn't cushioned by silk. It was propped up by cadavers. Here's the kicker. The chroniclers of the time actually admired him for it. Yep, in dusty manuscripts. Monks with ink-stained fingers would write things like, and thus, the people learned obedience. Imagine that. The guy who strung up rebels like Christmas decorations gets praised as a bringer of order. It's almost laughable if it weren't so terrifying. But here's what you need to remember: you'd be in that crowd too. You'd stand there with me, pretending not to look at the execution, but sneaking glances anyway. Because humans are wired that way. Morbid curiosity isn't modern, it's ancient. And back then, it wasn't a Netflix true crime binge. It was real, raw, and bloody right in front of you. And trust me, you wouldn't be able to look away. Not when the executioner's axe came down and the crowd gasped like one living organism. Not when the first row of spectators got sprayed. Not when children, yes, kids were lifted onto shoulders to get a better view, because this was considered education. What better way to teach them obedience than watching a thief roasted alive on a spit? The scariest part, it worked. Crime plummeted. Peasants didn't revolt. And nobles, who might have whispered rebellion into their goblets, suddenly found themselves very thirsty for loyalty. That's the kind of power a body count buys you in the Middle Ages. Not just fear order, but let's not romanticize it too much. You'd think after a while, people would get numb to the spectacle. They didn't. If anything, the king upped the ante. One beheading, old news. How about 50 at once? One thief, boring. Let's burn a dozen heretics together and call it a festival. Every few months, the stakes got higher, the blood got thicker, and the audience, they kept coming back for more. Fear had become entertainment. Now, I know what you're thinking. Surely someone tried to stop this madness, right? Surely some brave soul stepped forward and said, enough. Oh, they did. And guess what? Their head was the next one on the wall. That's the problem with tyrants. They don't leave room for debate. So here we are, standing in this medieval nightmare together, staring at the grimmest billboard campaign in history. And the question you have to ask yourself is this: was it all necessary? Could a king rule without blood as his signature? Maybe. But in his eyes, mercy wasn't strength. Mercy was weakness. And weakness meant you'd lose your crown and maybe your head too. But here's where it gets even creepier. We haven't even scratched the surface yet. Because this collector of skulls didn't just kill to rule, he killed for something deeper. Something almost ritualistic. His body counts weren't just punishment. They were offerings. To what? To whom? That's the part historians don't write down in neat Latin script. That's the part whispered behind church doors. The part that still makes your skin crawl if you listen too closely. And if you think this was bad, oh buddy, you're not ready for what comes next. Because in the next chapter, we're not just talking about executions. We're talking about massacres so wild they left entire towns haunted for centuries. So buckle up. If you thought a few skulls on the city wall was intense, wait until you hear about what happened when an entire village found itself on the wrong side of the king's wrath. The blood-soaked feasts of medieval courts were not just acts of violence. They were performances, rituals designed to remind everyone watching that life could be snuffed out at the whim of the powerful. You weren't eating bread and meat at these gatherings, you were chewing fear. Imagine sitting in a candlelit hall, the wooden rafters groaning with smoke, when suddenly the music stops. A servant is dragged forward, trembling, and without a word, his throat is cut right there on the rush-covered floor. The king lifts his goblet, toasts the blood now soaking the ground, and commands the feast to continue. You might think this kind of spectacle was rare, a moment of insanity, but no. These rulers thrived on making cruelty routine. For them, blood was currency, and body counts weren't just battlefield statistics, they were a flex. A noble with 100 kills on campaign was respected. But a king who could casually end a man's life during dinner, that was true power. And here's the part nobody talks about: the psychological trap. Once you saw blood spilled at the king's table, you weren't just afraid of him, you became complicit. Because you didn't protest, you didn't stand, you didn't speak. You stayed quiet, and that silence stained you. That was the genius of medieval body counts. They weren't just about death. They were about control. Now let's move into the chambers of one of the most infamous, Count Happy monarchs of all time, Charles the Bold of Burgundy. His name sounds like a tavern hero, but in truth he was one of the most terrifying collectors of corpses Europe had ever seen. Charles believed his destiny was to carve out a kingdom bigger than France itself. And to get there, he piled up bodies, like a miser piles up gold coins. At one point, Charles ordered his men to slaughter an entire town simply because they refused to pay his taxes on time. That's not a raid. That's not a siege, it's an execution, scaled up to thousands of innocents. Can you picture it? Streets lined with corpses, homes burning, children left wandering without families. All because one man wanted to send a message: pay me or join the pile. But here's the kicker. The more Charles killed, the more reckless he became. His body count wasn't just a statistic, it was an addiction. And like every addict, he couldn't stop escalating. He marched into wars he couldn't win, dragged his people into endless campaigns, and bled his treasury dry. The man who once drowned entire towns in blood eventually found himself outnumbered, abandoned, and ironically face down in a field, his own body stripped and left unburied. Tell me that isn't karma in armor. Yet even Charles was only a symptom of something bigger. Across Europe, rulers kept tally of lives, not because they needed to, but because it gave them legitimacy. The Pope himself often handed out blessings for kings who killed in God's name. Crusades were nothing more than massive body count, contests disguised as holy wars. Nobles bragged about their kills like athletes brag about trophies. And the people, they were forced to cheer, clap, and pretend this was glorious, because the alternative was joining the dead. And that's where I want you to pause for a second. Imagine being a medieval peasant. You've just worked 12 hours in the fields. Your back aches, your hands are blistered, and you're starving. Suddenly, soldiers ride into town. They declare your village owes the king more grain than you harvested. You try to argue, but the commander just laughs. Then, without warning, he picks a random man from the crowd and runs him through with a sword, just to prove he's serious. That's it. No trial, no negotiation. You're now living in a world where a corpse on the ground is as normal as the dirt under your fingernails. And here's the twisted brilliance. Those deaths weren't just punishment, they were theater. Every fallen body was a story told to the survivors. This could be you next. Fear multiplied faster than any army. Fear fed obedience. Fear kept kingdoms standing longer than stone walls. But we're not done yet, because while kings and nobles perfected their body count theater, there was one medieval ruler who pushed it to such extremes that even his allies started whispering about whether he was cursed by the devil himself. His name would become legend. His kill list would stretch into the tens of thousands. And his enemies prayed not for victory, but simply that he might look elsewhere.
You think ancient Rome was civilized, elegant, the blueprint for Western culture, a powerhouse of philosophy, architecture and law? Cute. Because behind those marble columns and epic speeches was a system so viciously obsessed with controlling women's bodies, it makes modern sexism look like amateur hour. In Rome, a man could legally rape a woman and call it worship. A father could murder his daughter for losing her virginity and be praised for it. Slave girls were bred like livestock, virgins were buried alive, and every one of those things, totally legal. This isn't a list of isolated horror stories, this was Roman policy, institutional, celebrated, and exported across continents. So if you've ever fantasized about the glory of the Roman Empire, by the end of this video, you'll be fantasizing about burning it to the ground. Let's start with the Roman idea of marriage. You'd think it was about love, family, or at the very least, political alliances. Nope. It was more like an ownership contract, but with more sex expectations and less personal rights. A Roman woman didn't just marry her husband, she became his legal property. Yes, property, like a couch, or a goat, or a villa with really bad plumbing. And this wasn't metaphorical. Roman law literally had a concept called manus, the legal authority of a husband over his wife. Once a woman entered into a manus marriage, her husband gained total control over her body, her property, and her legal identity. She couldn't own land, sign contracts, or even make basic life decisions without his permission. You know what's romantic? Being told you now legally belong to a man because Jupiter said so. But wait, it gets worse. In some versions of marriage, the woman didn't even get to choose which type of legal arrangement she entered. Her father could decide whether she stayed under his control or got handed off to a new man like a scroll full of bad investment advice. You've probably heard of the Vestal Virgins, Rome's elite priestesses chosen to guard the sacred flame of Vesta. Sounds noble, right? Holy women keeping the city's spiritual fire alive. Wrong. It was the ancient Roman version of a lifelong chastity prison with the worst HR policy ever. To become a Vestal Virgin, a girl had to be chosen between the ages of 6 and 10. That's right. Before she even had a say in what breakfast cereal she liked, Rome decided she would never know what sex was like ever. Vestal virgins had to remain celibate for 30 years. Not 10, not 15, 30. That's 3 decades of religious lockdown with 0 romantic options and a flame you weren't allowed to let die or else. Oh yeah, if they had sex, they were buried alive. Let me say that again. If a Vestal virgin was found to have broken her vow of celibacy, she was buried, alive, in a tiny underground chamber, with a loaf of bread and a jug of water. As if hydration makes being buried alive more chill. What kind of system says, hey, protect this fire, never have sex, and if you mess up, into the ground you go? Ancient Rome, that's who. Here's the plot twist. Prostitution was completely legal in Rome. But being a woman in Rome, not nearly as legal. Any woman could be registered as a sex worker, even against her will. There was an actual Roman law called infamia. And no, it wasn't a new fragrance by Gucci. It was a legal status of dishonor, and if you were labeled as infamous, congratulations, you just lost most of your rights as a citizen. If a woman was accused, not proven, just accused of having promiscuous behavior, her father or husband could legally register her as a meretrix, official prostitute, even if she had never taken money for sex in her life. That's like someone calling you a barista because you once held a coffee cup. And once registered, you were stuck with that label forever. You couldn't get married, couldn't testify in court, couldn't inherit property basically. Society downgraded you from person to municipal utility. Even worse, women born to slaves or in poverty were sometimes forced into sex work by the state, especially during times of celebration. Yes, Rome had festivals like Saturnalia where it was socially acceptable, expected, for women to be sexually available to elite men. Voluntary, that wasn't even in the vocabulary. Now let's talk about something truly soul-crushing, how rape was defined in ancient Rome. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Rape wasn't considered a crime against the woman. It was a crime against the man who owned her. If a man raped a married woman, the husband could seek legal action. If a man raped an unmarried woman, her father could. But the woman herself? She wasn't even considered a legal party in the case. It was like her body was a piece of borrowed furniture someone dented during a party. She didn't get justice, her male guardian did. And sometimes, the solution was even worse than the crime. The rapist could marry the woman as a form of reparation. Yes, you heard that right. Sorry I assaulted you, let's get married. That wasn't justice. That was trauma with a legally binding contract. Here's something that would be funny if it weren't so disgusting. In ancient Rome, proving a woman's virginity was treated like inspecting a second-hand chariot. Families obsessed over the idea that their daughters be untouched, not out of concern for her health, but to protect male pride and property rights. So they invented tests, dumb ones. One involved giving the girl a potion made of saffron, wine, and herbs. If she vomited, virgin. If she didn't, clearly been around. Another involved walking barefoot over eggs. If none cracked, she was pure. If they broke, cue dramatic gasps, she might as well be labeled a public fountain. None of these had any scientific merit, but they were used to determine a woman's entire social value. Can you imagine being 16, tripping over an egg, and suddenly being declared not fit for marriage? You know how today some couples stress over ovulation apps and prenatal vitamins? In ancient Rome, the pressure to have kids, specifically sons, wasn't just emotional, it was existential. If a Roman woman didn't produce heirs fast enough, the state, her husband, and even random strangers had something to say about it. And by something, we mean rituals, treatments, and punishments that make medieval sex schedules look like a spa weekend. Roman doctors, and we're using doctors very loosely here, believed that female infertility could be fixed with things like warm wine enemas, bloodletting near the uterus, and our personal favorite, fumigating the vagina with burning herbs to chase away bad spirits. Because obviously, nothing helps conception like smoking out your womb like a barbecue pit. If a woman still didn't conceive, the blame never fell on the man. Never. Roman science, again, huge air quotes, thought women were naturally defective if they didn't get pregnant. So the treatments got harsher. One method involved inserting wool soaked in crushed animal liver. Another involved being beaten around the pelvis to stir up the womb. Yes, beaten, as a medical procedure, because Rome believed that if something's not working, the best solution is violence and raw meat. Let's drop the jokes for a moment, because this next part, it's horrific. In ancient Rome, enslaved women were sexual property by default. There was no law against it, no consent required, no legal path to say no. We're talking about a society where a master could use, abuse, and impregnate his female slaves without consequence, and that was considered standard. Slave women were often forced into roles as household sex workers, concubines, or even used as party entertainment for guests. Their bodies were not just controlled, they were commodified. There were no age protections, no limits on what could be done to them. Girls as young as 12, sometimes younger, were sold specifically for their sexual value. Even worse, any children born from these assaults became property too. They were automatically enslaved unless the master decided otherwise. So rape wasn't just about domination, it was a breeding strategy. The Roman elite didn't just tolerate this, they bragged about it. Writers like Juvenal and Martial made jokes about slave girls and their masters. Wealthy Romans saw enslaved women as status symbols. Owning beautiful women was like owning exotic pets, a disgusting mix of racism, misogyny, and entitlement, all rolled into one horrifying institution. Now, let's say you were a Roman woman accused of sexual misconduct. Not proven, just accused. What happens next? A quiet conversation? A warning? Try public humiliation rituals that sound like deleted scenes from a horror film. One of the most degrading punishments was something called damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts, usually reserved for criminals, but sometimes used on women labeled as adulterers or promiscuous. Here's how it worked. They were stripped naked, tied up, and thrown into an arena, to be mauled to death by wild animals, in front of a cheering crowd. Yes, the Romans turned alleged sexual misconduct into a gladiator-style public execution for women, because clearly the most logical way to punish adultery is by feeding someone to lions. Even when women weren't executed, they faced ritualized hair-cutting, branding, or being paraded through the streets topless, with signs around their necks listing their crimes. Think of it as a government-mandated walk of shame, except instead of judgmental stares, it came with a legal stamp and possibly a donkey cart. You might have heard that ancient Rome had theater, music, and dance. What you might not know is that many female performers, especially dancers and singers, were legally classified as infames, just like prostitutes. Why? Because performing in public meant exposing your body, your voice, and your femininity, all things Roman men decided were indecent. Even successful actresses and entertainers couldn't escape this label. No matter how talented, respected or rich, they were barred from marriage, stripped of legal protections, and legally available for sexual use by powerful patrons. If that sounds like institutionalized exploitation, that's because it was. And then there were the gladiatrices. Yes, female gladiators were real, who were forced to fight in skimpy armor for male entertainment. And when they weren't fighting, many were sold for sex to rich spectators as part of the event package. Roman entertainment. Come for the blood, stay for the misogyny. You'd think, with all this pressure to make babies, Rome would also come up with some reasonable birth control methods. You'd be wrong. So wrong. Here's what passed for contraception in ancient Rome. Drinking the urine of eunuchs. Wearing amulets made from wolf bones. Bathing in vinegar mixed with ashes. Inserting pastes made of honey, lead, and crocodile dung into the vagina. Yes, crocodile dung, again. Apparently every ancient culture looked at animal poop and thought, yes, medical innovation. The most scientific method involved using a plant called silphium, which was so popular as a contraceptive that it literally went extinct. That's right, the Romans used so much of it to not get pregnant, they wiped the entire species off the face of the earth. The world's first contraceptive shortage, brought to you by a libido-fueled empire with no understanding of sustainability. Here comes one of the most disturbing Roman contradictions. While Rome shamed women for being sexual, it also had entire religious cults built on forced female sexuality. Welcome to the Temple of Bona Dea. Bona Dea, or the good goddess, was worshipped in women, only ceremonies where men were strictly forbidden. Sounds empowering, right? Except, women, especially enslaved ones, were often used sexually as part of temple rituals to cleanse male sins or bring divine favor. We're talking about institutionalized sexual sacrifice dressed up as religion. Some ceremonies included masked orgies, forced intoxication, and symbolic fertility offerings involving real women being ritually penetrated by sacred objects or high-ranking men acting as avatars of the gods. The worst part? This was considered holy. So let's sum that up. Female sexuality equals dirty, shameful, punishable. Female sexual exploitation equals sacred, spiritual, and state-approved. Rome, where logic goes to die. Let's say your husband died. Tragic, sure, but also legally complicated. Because in ancient Rome, if you were a widow, you couldn't just move on with your life. Oh no. You had to mourn officially, publicly, and without sex for at least 10 months. Why 10 months? Because Roman men thought it might take that long for a woman to expel any leftover semen from her late husband. Not kidding. The logic was, well, we don't want the new husband raising another man's baby, so let's put her on a no-touch quarantine for most of a year. Meanwhile, what happened to widowers? They could remarry immediately. No mourning period, no social shame, just, oh no, she's dead anyway, here's my new 14-year-old bride. Double standard? Try Olympic-level hypocrisy. Now let's talk cheating. In Rome, a married woman caught being unfaithful could be executed. Her husband had the legal right to kill her, especially if he caught her in the act inside his home. This was called Lex Julia de Adulteriis, and it sounds like a law designed to protect marriage, right? Except here's the twist. Men could cheat all they wanted, as long as it was with someone socially appropriate, like a slave, a prostitute, or an unmarried woman of lower status. So, in Roman law, a man having sex outside marriage equals fine. A woman doing it, punishable by death. It wasn't about loyalty, it was about property. Because, once again, a Roman woman's body wasn't her own, it was an extension of her husband's social reputation. Damaging that? Unforgivable. Damaging her? Totally legal. If a Roman father suspected his unmarried daughter of having sex, he had legal permission to kill both her and her lover. No trial, no evidence required, just vibes and a knife. This wasn't considered murder, it was considered preserving family honor. And if that daughter had been raped, didn't matter. If the father believed she had been willing, he could kill her with legal immunity. This was called jus vitae necisque, the right of life and death, and it turned Roman fathers into state-sanctioned executioners. So let's do a recap. Women who had sex before marriage, killable. Women who were raped, potentially killable. Women who had affairs, definitely killable. Men who did all of the above, promoted to senator. Welcome to Rome. Enjoy your stay. Avoid eye contact with your dad. As the Roman Empire expanded, so did its use of female sexuality as a political tool, especially under the emperors. Women in the imperial family, empresses, daughters, nieces, were often used as symbols of purity, fertility, and divine favor, not as people, but as propaganda. Take Livia Drusilla, wife of Emperor Augustus. She was portrayed as the ultimate Roman matron, modest, obedient, sexually pure. Whether or not she actually was didn't matter, it was the image Rome wanted to project. On the flip side, if the empire wanted to destroy someone's reputation, they'd go for the sexual rumors. Take Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius. She was portrayed as a nymphomaniac, participating in orgies, sneaking out to brothels, even competing with prostitutes to see who could sleep with more men in one night. Was any of it true? Maybe some, maybe none. But it worked. The public hated her, she lost power, and was executed, all because her sexual image got turned into political ammunition. In Rome, if you were a woman in power, your sexuality could either crown you as a goddess or bury you as a threat. Let's say a Roman woman survived sexual assault. What did society do? Offer therapy, support groups, justice, try taxes. Women labeled as dishonored, which included survivors of rape, were subject to public shame taxes. In some regions, they could be charged extra during marriage proceedings, barred from temple services, or denied legal protection in future court cases. That's right, Roman survivors didn't just get shamed, they got financially penalized. It wasn't just salt in the wound, it was an invoice. So let's step back. Ancient Rome, the empire that gave us law codes, engineering and philosophy, also gave us legally sanctioned rape, institutionalized sexual slavery, religious virginity prisons, death penalties for pleasure, and a legal system designed to control, exploit, and silence women. And what makes it all the more terrifying? It was normal. It was accepted. It was written into the foundation of one of the most influential civilizations in history. This wasn't fringe behavior, it was policy. And the echoes of those laws and values still ripple through modern systems. When you hear people idealize Rome as the cradle of civilization, just remember that cradle was filled with chains, poison, and crocodile dung. So next time someone romanticizes the Roman Empire, tell them about the forced enema fertility treatments, or the courtroom where a woman had to prove she didn't enjoy her own assault, or the 12-year-old slave girl sold for entertainment at a senator's dinner party. Ancient Rome wasn't just brutal, it was bureaucratically brutal. Organized, weaponized, and legally codified sexual violence. And yet people still survived, resisted, subverted. Not because the system wanted them to, but because women always find a way to exist in spite of the systems built to erase them. Thanks for watching. And if this blew your mind, just wait till you hear what ancient Greece did with public erections and courtroom dildos. But that's another story for another disturbing episode. Subscribe, like, and question everything history told you was civilized.
If Charles the Bold was addicted to his own body counts, then what comes next makes him look like a warm-up act. Because there was one ruler in medieval Europe whose obsession with death was so extreme, so theatrical, and so relentless, that Even his allies started muttering in church pews. This man isn't just a king, he's a curse in flesh. His name, Vlad III of Wallachia. Yeah, the guy who later inspired the Dracula myth. But here's the thing you've probably heard. The surface level story. He impaled people. Scary, gory, brutal. That's the Halloween version. The truth. It was darker, nastier, and far more calculated than you've been told. Picture this. You're traveling through Wallachia in the mid-1400s. The roads are dusty, the forests endless, and wolves howl at night. But what really terrifies you isn't nature, it's what you might stumble upon. Because along the roadside, stretching for miles, you'd see forests of corpses. Men, women, children all, skewered on wooden stakes, left to rot in the sun. Their faces twisted in agony, their skin blackened by flies, their bodies swaying in the wind like grotesque banners. Now, here's the detail. Most people skip. Vlad didn't just kill randomly. He staged it. He created what you could call landscapes of death. Imagine thousands of stakes arranged in perfect, military-like rows. Corpses positioned in patterns so precise that when an invading army rode in, they felt like they weren't entering a battlefield, they were stepping into hell itself. That's not just cruelty. That's psychological warfare on a level medieval Europe had never seen, and it worked. When the Ottomans, one of the most powerful forces on earth at the time, marched to crush Vlad, they stopped dead literally when they saw the forest he'd built. Imagine tens of thousands of impaled bodies rotting in the summer heat, the stench carrying for miles. The Ottoman soldiers gagged, some vomited, some dropped their weapons outright. Entire units turned around and fled. Vlad had weaponized death itself. His body count wasn't just a statistic, it was a wall, a defense stronger than stone. But let's pause and ask the real question. Why? Why did he do this? Was he insane? Demon-possessed? Or was there something colder behind it? Here's where it gets fascinating. Vlad grew up as a political hostage. As a child, he was kept by the Ottomans, taught their ways, beaten into obedience, and reminded every day that his life could be taken at a whim. He learned one core truth. Fear is the sharpest sword. So when he finally took power in Wallachia, he didn't just rule, he turned his entire country into a theater of terror. Every corpse was a stage prop. Every stake was a warning sign. Every body count was a message written in blood. And don't think for a second that he only targeted invaders. No, he turned the same cruelty inward. Corrupt nobles, skewered. Thieves, skewered. Entire villages that didn't obey tax orders, wiped out and displayed. There are stories of him inviting hundreds of noble families to a banquet, then locking the doors, stabbing them one by one, and having their bodies dragged outside to be impaled as the entertainment. Now imagine you're one of his subjects. Every time you leave your hut, you see another body swaying in the breeze. Every time you cross yourself in church, you wonder if you'll be next. You don't even whisper his name too loudly at night, because who knows who's listening. That's how fear rewires a society. People stop dreaming. They stop resisting. They become husks, living only to survive another day. And here's the kicker, while Western Europe painted him as a monster, in Wallachia, many peasants actually saw him as a savior. Why? Because his brutality also brought order. Under Vlad, you could leave a bag of gold in the street, and no one would touch it. Crime vanished not because people became virtuous, but because they knew stealing a loaf of bread might earn them a stake through the chest. So was Vlad a monster? Or was he the necessary evil of a land torn apart by warlords' corruption and foreign invasion? That's the paradox of his body count. Horrifying cruelty, mixed with iron stability. But let's not get too comfortable with that thought, because as terrifying as Vlad's forests of death were, Europe had rulers whose body counts weren't about warfare or discipline. No, some rulers killed for pleasure, for art, for twisted curiosity. They turned death into entertainment, a personal hobby, almost like medieval serial killers with crowns. And one of them made Vlad look almost merciful. If Vlad the Impaler ruled through terror, then the next figure didn't just use terror, he indulged in it, like a noble sipping fine wine. Meet Guile de Race, a French nobleman, war hero, and companion of Joan of Arc. Yes, you heard that right, the same guy who once rode beside the saintly warrior girl, carrying the banner of God, would later go down in history as one of the most twisted killers of the medieval world. Let me set the stage for you. France, mid-1400s. The 100 Years' War is raging. The English are still hanging around, and Joan of Arc is the shining symbol of hope. Gilles de Rais is her right-hand man, rich, powerful, and commanding armies. He's the golden boy of the French court. But after Joan is captured and burned at the stake, Gilles loses his anchor. Without her, his life spirals into a void, and into that void, he pours his wealth, his madness, and his thirst for something unspeakable. At first, his decline looks like the usual noble excess: massive feasts, ridiculous plays, lavish castles, decorated like palaces of fantasy. Imagine walking into his hall and seeing not just tapestries and torches, but whole theatrical productions staged on a nightly basis, with costumes that cost more than entire villages. Gilles wasn't just rich, he was bleeding wealth, like a man trying to buy his way out of despair. But then the rumors start. Servants whisper, villagers talk, children vanish, and soon, a horrifying pattern emerges. You see, Gilles wasn't content with feasts and plays. He developed a hobby so sickening it makes even Vlad's forests of corpses look almost clinical. He began abducting children, mostly boys from peasant families, sometimes girls too. He would lure them to his castle with promises of work, food, or adventure. And once inside, the nightmare began. Here's where the medieval record gets disturbingly detailed. Testimonies from servants, priests, and even Gilles's accomplices describe the same scene over and over. The children stripped, humiliated, tortured, and then killed, sometimes strangled, sometimes stabbed, sometimes worse. Their little bodies discarded, burned, or buried in the castle grounds. The numbers. Historians estimate anywhere from 80 to 200 victims, but many whispered it was far more. Imagine being a peasant parent in those years. Your child runs out to play, never comes back, and when you ask at the castle gates, the guards just sneer, and you know. But here's the twisted part. Gilles didn't even try to hide his crimes well. His servants knew. His neighbors suspected. Some priests had direct evidence. But because he was rich, noble, and once a war hero, everyone looked the other way for a while. That's how power worked in medieval Europe. If you had enough gold, enough titles, enough connections, you could pile up a body count that would make the devil blush, and no one would stop you. So what finally brought him down? Ironically, it wasn't the murders at first, it was money. Gilles had squandered his vast fortune on his grotesque lifestyle. He started pawning off his lands, selling estates, even looting churches to pay his debts. And that's when the church took notice. They didn't care about missing peasant children, but robbing holy property. That was unforgivable. Once the investigation opened, the truth spilled out like blood from a wound. Witness after witness testified. The castles were searched. Bones and remains were uncovered. And suddenly, the man who once stood beside Joan of Arc was revealed as one of the darkest figures of medieval history. His trial in 1440 was a spectacle. Crowds gathered as parents sobbed, describing how their children vanished. Priests trembled as they recounted Gilles's confessions. Even hardened soldiers turned pale hearing the details. And when the verdict came, it was unanimous: guilty. Guilty of murder, sorcery, and heresy. On October 26, 1440, Gilles de Rais was executed, hanged, and then burned. But here's where it gets eerie. Some peasants, whose children he had slaughtered, actually wept at his death. Why? Because medieval minds are complicated. To them, Gilles was both a monster and a lord, a murderer and a man touched by Joan of Arc's holy light. Killing him didn't erase the confusion, it just left scars, so let's step back. Vlad used death as a weapon of fear. Gilles used it as personal indulgence, a grotesque form of entertainment. And yet, both men's body counts rewired entire societies, leaving behind trauma that lasted for generations. But here's the twist. You think these are isolated cases? Oh no, medieval Europe was crawling with rulers, nobles, and warlords who built their reputations on how many bodies they could stack. And one of the most chilling wasn't even a man, it was a woman. You've heard of Vlad the Impaler. You've heard of Gilla de Race. But what if I told you that in the bloody annals of medieval Europe, one of the most terrifying figures wasn't a warlord with armies, but a noblewoman with silk dresses, rings on her fingers, and a smile that could freeze your blood? Her name, Countess Elizabeth Bathory. Now technically, she lived in the late Renaissance, early 1600s Hungary, but trust me, her world was still drenched in that medieval darkness. And the stories that grew around her make her the undisputed queen of body counts, cruelty, and nightmares. Imagine being a peasant girl in the Carpathian Mountains. You're poor, you're desperate, and one day, a messenger from the castle tells your parents, the countess needs a maid. That's an opportunity, right? A chance to work in a grand estate, maybe even earn some coin. So you go. You enter the towering gates of Sieged Castle, expecting a life of servitude, but not horror. Because once those gates close, you're not coming back out. The legend goes that Bathory killed hundreds of girls, maybe even up to 600. 600. Can you even picture that number? That's not murder, that's industry. She didn't just kill. She turned death into a production line, and the methods. Brutal. Servants later testified that the countess would beat her victims until their flesh tore apart, stab them with needles, freeze them in snow, or burn them with hot irons. Some stories even claimed she bathed in their blood, believing it would keep her young and beautiful forever. Now, historians debate that last part. Maybe it was just folklore, exaggerated by her enemies, but the sheer number of missing girls was undeniable. What makes it even more terrifying is that she didn't operate in secret. Like Gilla de Race, she was protected by her rank, her money, her influence. Local nobles whispered, priests shuddered, villagers lived in terror, but for years, no one dared touch her. After all, who was going to accuse the most powerful woman in Hungary of mass murder? That's like pointing a finger at the queen herself. But you can only hide so many bodies. Eventually the rumors grew too loud, the number of missing girls too obvious. By 1610, King Matthias of Hungary finally ordered an investigation. A team of officials stormed her castle and what they found turned whispers into screams. Dead girls in the halls. Half-dead ones locked in chambers. Torture instruments lying around like household tools. The castle itself had become a grave. Now here's the bizarre part. Unlike Vlad or Gil, Bathory wasn't executed. Oh no, she was too highborn for that. Executing a noblewoman of her rank would have been scandalous, politically dangerous. So instead, they sentenced her to something stranger. She was bricked up inside her own castle. Imagine it. Windows sealed, doors locked, just a slit in the wall where food was passed. And there she stayed, a living ghost in her fortress of death, until she finally died in 1614. But let's not skip over the real impact here. If Vlad's forest of corpses sent messages to invading armies, and if Gils's victims terrorized French villages, then Bathory's killings tore through the very fabric of peasant life. Parents became paranoid. Girls hid at the sight of noble carriages. Even centuries later, she's remembered as the Blood Countess, one of the great monsters of history. Now, here's where it gets juicy. Some historians argue she might not have been as guilty as legend claims. Maybe her enemies exaggerated the numbers to strip her of power. Maybe the tales of bathing in blood were pure propaganda. But even if half the stories are true, even if just a fraction of those 600 deaths happened, it still puts her among the deadliest figures of the medieval and early modern world. And if you're sitting there thinking, okay, that's it. That's the peak of body counts, right? It can't get worse than this. Oh, my friend, you'd be wrong. Because while Bathory's crimes were personal, tucked away in her castle, the next wave of medieval killers didn't hide in shadows. They marched with banners, armies, and the authority of kings, and their body counts make even 600 look like child's play. We're about to step into the world of medieval warfare where entire cities burned. Thousands fell in a single day, and rulers measured their greatness not in gold or castles, but in how many corpses they left behind. And trust me, this is where the numbers get insane. Picture this. It's the early 1200s. You're living in some quiet little city along the Silk Road. You've got your shop, your family, your goat's life is simple, even boring. Then, one morning, you hear a sound rolling across the horizon. At first you think it's thunder. But it's not, it's hooves. Thousands of them, a dust cloud the size of a storm. And at its head, Genghis Khan. Now listen, when we talk body counts, nobody even comes close to this guy. Historians estimate that Genghis and his Mongol armies killed up to 40 million people. Let that number sink in. 40 million. That's more than some modern world wars. That's entire civilizations erased like chalk off a board. And the craziest part, they weren't just slaughtering because they liked the sound of screaming. Though, fair warning, the Mongols were really into psychological warfare. No, this was strategy. The Mongols understood something simple. Fear travels faster than horses. If you massacre one city in the most brutal way possible, the next 10 cities will surrender without a fight. That was their game plan. Imagine you're the mayor of City AU. Resist. You get wiped out. Men butchered. Women enslaved. Walls torn down. Now City B sees this. When the Mongols arrive, City B throws open the gates and says, "Welcome. Take our food. Take our gold. Just please, don't kill us." Efficient, right? But here's the nightmare detail. When they did decide to kill, they didn't just kill soldiers. They killed everyone. Whole populations. There's this infamous example in A-Shaper in 1221. After a Mongol commander was killed, Genghis ordered the entire city destroyed. Sources claim 1.7 million people were executed. 1.7 million in just one campaign. Even if that number is exaggerated, which it probably is, we're still talking hundreds of thousands. Gone. Wiped off the map. And the Mongols had this almost factory-like approach to killing. Each soldier was told, "You kill X number of people today." It wasn't chaos. It wasn't chaos to slaughter. Imagine lining up villagers, dividing them like livestock, and then tallying the bodies like a harvest. Cold. Systematic. But it wasn't just the death sit, it was the cultural erasure. Entire libraries, temples, and cities that had stood for centuries were burned to ash. Cities like Herat, Samarkand, Merval turned into ghost stories. One chronicler wrote that the Mongols left pyramids of skulls outside the gates, stacked like macabre trophies. That was their message. Resist us, and this is your future. And yet here's where it gets twisted. Genghis Khan also built one of the largest empires in history. The same man responsible for all that destruction also created trade routes, laws, postal systems. You could say he was both a destroyer and a builder. But make no mistake, the foundation of his empire was laid in blood. You, sitting in your quiet little house in medieval Asia, would have lived with a constant nightmare. What if the Mongols come? It wasn't just fear of death, it was the fear that your entire existence, your family, your town, your culture, could be erased in a single Mongol raid. And nobody would even remember you existed. Now, here's the FOMO kicker. If you think Genghis was brutal, wait until you meet his grandsons. Because while Genghis was building his empire in Asia, his heirs were busy unleashing terror on Europe and the Middle East, taking body counts to an even scarier scale. And trust me, the cities, they crushed places. You've actually heard of make the whole medieval world feel like one giant blood-soaked chessboard. Imagine you're living in 1240s Europe. You're in Kiev, a proud medieval city with glittering churches, busy markets, and centuries of history behind it. People are laughing in taverns, kids are running in the streets, priests are ringing bells. Everything feels safe, stable. But then you hear the stories. Riders from the east, fast as lightning, tearing through entire kingdoms. Castles crumbling, whole towns burned. And just when you tell yourself, nah, that's too far away, the horizon turns black. It's the Mongols again, but this time, led by Batu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson. And trust me, Batu wasn't the kind of guy you wanted showing up at your gates. In 1240, the Mongols laid siege to Kiev. Now, Kiev wasn't some small village, was the crown jewel of Rus. A city so famous that medieval travelers compared it to Constantinople. But the Mongols didn't care. They wanted to make an example, The chronicles describe it like a nightmare. The Mongols broke through the defenses, flooded the streets, and within days Kiev was nothing but ash and corpses. One monk wrote that only 200 people survived out of a population of tens of thousands. 200. Imagine standing in a city square, filled with thousands of bodies, and realizing you are one of the last living souls in a place that once bustled with life. But Kiev was just the beginning. The Mongols swept further west, hitting Poland and Hungary, at the Battle of Liegnitz, 1241. A combined European force tried to stop them, knights in shining armor, banners waving, the whole medieval superhero squad. They charged with all the courage they could muster. And the Mongols, they laughed. They used feigned retreats, arrows flying in perfect waves, and then surrounded the knights like wolves circling sheep. The result, almost the entire European army annihilated. And here's the grotesque detail after the battle. The Mongols cut off the ears of the fallen and carried them in sacks to count the dead. Picture it, hundreds of sacks, filled to the brim with human ears. That's how they did math. And then came Hungary. The Mongols stormed into the kingdom, burning villages, massacring civilians, leaving entire provinces empty. Chroniclers wrote that half the population of Hungary was wiped out. Half, imagine if every other person you knew gone. Meanwhile, down in the Middle East, another of Genghis's grandsons, Hulagu Khan, was leading his own apocalypse. His target, Baghdad. And if Kiev was tragic, Baghdad was catastrophic. Baghdad wasn't just any city, it was the intellectual capital of the world. Libraries, scholars, art, medicine, the city was the beating heart of Islamic civilization. But in 1258, Hulagu besieged it. The Caliph surrendered, begging for mercy. Hulagu didn't care. For 7 days, Baghdad was turned into a slaughterhouse. Estimates say 200,000 to 1 million people were killed. The Tigris River, they say, ran black with ink from the destroyed libraries, and red with blood from the corpses. Imagine standing at the riverbank and seeing a current of books and bodies drifting past. And the cherry on top, Hulagu rolled the Caliphs, the leader of the Islamic world, into a carpet and had him trampled by horses. Why? Because Mongol tradition said you shouldn't spill royal blood on the earth. Brutality with etiquette. But here's the kicker. The Mongols didn't just conquer. They destabilized entire regions. Europe, the Middle East, Asia all lived with the dread of Mongol hooves thundering over the horizon. People told bedtime stories to their kids. Behave, or the Mongols will come. That's how deep the fear went. And yet, Europe got lucky. Just when the Mongols seemed ready to steamroll the entire continent, Batu Khan suddenly turned back. Why? Because the great Khan back in Mongolia had died, and Bato had to go home to fight for succession. That twist of fate probably saved medieval Europe. If not, maybe Paris, Rome, and London would have been reduced to piles of skulls, just like Kiev and Baghdad. But the damage was already done. Whole kingdoms broken, populations erased, cultures lost. And the Mongols proved one horrifying truth. Sometimes, the scariest monsters in history don't come from fairy tales. They come on horseback. And if you think that's the end of medieval, megabody counts. Oh no, my friend. Because while the Mongols painted the world red in the 1200s, the Black Death was waiting right around the corner in the 1300s. And that little invisible army made even Genghis Khan look tame. Picture this. It's the year 1347. You're living in Europe. Life is already tough. Wars, bad harvests, corrupt nobles, but still, there's routine. Markets are busy, churches are full, taverns are noisy. Then, one day, a ship arrives. In Sicily, nothing unusual, right? Except, the crew is dead. Or worse, half dead, covered in strange black swellings, buboes that ooze pus and stink like rot. Within days, the disease spreads inland. This wasn't just a sickness. This was the apocalypse, dressed as a plague. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it erased populations. Historians estimate between 75 to 200 million deaths worldwide, with Europe losing nearly 1/3 to half of its population. Imagine walking through your town and realizing every other person you knew, gone. Streets empty, houses abandoned. silence where laughter used to be. And here's the kicker. People had no idea what caused it. Today we know it was Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas on rats. But back then, people thought it was God's punishment. Others blamed bad air, poisoned wells, even Jews. And because medieval folks loved solutions as brutal as the problem, they turned on entire communities. Thousands of Jews across Europe were massacred, burned alive, or expelled, all because people thought they had cursed the water. Meanwhile, ordinary villagers turned to creepy methods. Ever heard of the flagellants? These were groups of people who walked town to town, whipping themselves bloody in public, hoping their pain would make God forgive humanity. Imagine being a kid and watching a caravan of men in hoods, chanting, beating themselves until their backs ripped open, while everyone cheers them on like it's medieval street theater. Terrifying. And the symptoms? Oh, buddy. Forget mild coughs. Victims would wake up fine and be dead by nightfall. First came the fever, then the buboes, swollen black lumps in the armpits and groin. Then came vomiting blood, delirium, and a smell that made even family abandon their loved ones. Chronicles say entire families rotted together in locked houses because nobody dared enter. Gravediggers, they gave up. Corpses piled in the streets, dumped into giant pits. One Italian writer, Boccaccio, described seeing pigs rooting through human corpses left on the road. Yeah, pigs eating dead humans while survivors watched helplessly. That was daily life. But the worst part, it didn't just kill. It broke society. Priests abandoned churches. Parents abandoned children. Nobles fled their castles. Peasants looted. Whole towns went lawless. In Paris, they rang church bells non-stop, hoping the sound would drive away the plague. In Venice, they invented quarantine, literally locking ships offshore for 40 days, hence the word quaranta. Desperation gave birth to modern medicine, but only through unimaginable suffering. And remember the Mongols we just talked about. They might have helped start this mess. There's this infamous story from 1346 at Kaffa, a Genoese trade port in Crimea. The Mongols were besieging the city, but their soldiers began dying of plague. So what did they do? They catapulted the infected corpses over the city walls. Biological warfare, medieval style. The Genoese sailors who fled carried the disease to Europe, and boom, continent-wide apocalypse. Now imagine you're alive back then. Every knock at your door could mean death. Every cough from a neighbor could be your end. Entire villages just vanished. And the fear wasn't just of dying. It was of not being buried, of rotting in the open, forgotten. People started writing wills the moment they sneezed. And art, it got creepy. Skeletons, dancing corpses, grim reapers, death became the fashion trend of the century. But here's the insane part. The Black Death wasn't just tragedy. It reshaped history. With so many dead, labor became scarce, so peasants suddenly had power. Nobles lost control. Feudalism cracked. The Renaissance, the rise of wages, the questioning of the church. All of it, in some twisted way, was born out of the plague. The apocalypse planted seeds of rebirth, and yet, standing there in 1348, in a street filled with plague carts, bells tolling, and the stench of decay choking your lungs, you wouldn't think rebirth. You'd think the world is ending. But if you thought the Black Death was the worst humanity could face, wait until you hear what came after, when war, famine, and superstition teamed up to keep the nightmare alive, even after the plague faded. Imagine Tum Plague, say Bakge. Tum Hairy Family, Tum Her Dust, Tum Hara, Pura Gowan, Odlog, Marchu Kane, or Tum Abi, Be Zindaho. Sounds lucky, right? Wrong. Zinda, Rena Matlab, Tum Ha Plague, Kabod Ka, Mental Breakdown Europe Face, Karna, Hoga.c, Plague, Kabod Logon, Niek, Cheese, Samaj Li, Humsafe, Nahi, Hain, Kabibi Uper, Say Punishment, AA, Shukta Hai, or Jab Fear, Insan Kayander, Jam Jatahai, Toe, Woe Weird or Violent Solutions, Nikaltahai, Sabs Pehel, Shuru Hui Which Hunts, Peasants or Nobles, Dono Ni, decide kia, plague ii, topa koi, which, ya sorcerer responsible, hoga, or kiamila, oritin, co-blame. Poor women, widows, yakoi, alog, nazar, ane, wali orat, coart kohat, korant which declare kar, diaj ata, or fear torture chambers. Witch hunting manuals, licky gay jismi instructions, the kai's tum, which k nipples pay needles, chubhow to check karo, whoa, bleeding karti haya nahi. Like, imagine that level of paranoia. Or agar, confession, chahi tobas, thoda, sarak, ya hot iron. Or confession, matlab guilty, result, burned alive. Leakin surf witches nahi. Jews coke fair say target banaya gaya. P-hole, high plague, K, Doron, Kaha, Gaia, Thakai, Unhone, Wells, Poison Key, Hain, A, Plague, Kabod, Har famine, Har storm, Hair tragedy, blame Jews. Whole communities cost slaughter card dia Gaia. It wasn't about logic. It was about fear needing a scapegoat. Or about a Hisab's creepy cultural trend. The dance of death, Harjaga churches, or art mayak, high cheese deek, rahi thi, skeletons, corpses, or humans ek, sath dance cart, hugh, iska, matlab, death sabko, lajata, high king hoya beggar. The imagery har wall painting, har book, har theater, performance my gay, tomgao, gay totem, literally skeletons k, murals, girt milt, matlab, plague niart, kobe goth, banadia, or pada high, plague k, survivors, kaya cart, the dance. Manias, yes, literal dancing until collapse. Pora, town, ekdom, say street my aya, jata, or nonstop, dance karta, din, rot, binaruk. Kuchlog heart attack, say margay. Kuch collapse, hokarav high nahi. Historians Oshby, confuse hain, mass hysteria, thaya ergot, poisoning bread my fungus. But imagine tum ek, medieval city, my ho, or Pura town zombie highs dance, karaha, high until they drop. Creepy as hell, superstitions ni, or b, pagalpan, astrology kana m. P. Kahagaya. Ka plague stars. Kalimansa. Kayithi. Remedies. Carry flowers in your mask, wear amulets, drink powdered emeralds, yes, ground up jewels. Ya, fear urine, say naha lo. Log literally apnea health k, lai kuch, bikar rehithi, or is doron ek, or cheese rise hui, fear-based religion. Churches. My priest's sermons deet. Plague god ka, warning high. Tum sab, sinners ho, log abni bakchin kob beat cart, tuk god, kagusa unpe na. I. Or Joe flagellants. Plague K Doron goomed. The woe movement or Badaho Gaia. Europe my caravans of bleeding, chanting men dict thee, or authorities be confused thee. Ke inkostopkarenia support, but let's not forget the irony. Plague ni ek. Or Transhurokia. Pleasure obsession. Kuchlog sach thee. Kal. Death Shakti high. Ta. Enjoy Karo taverns, brothels, gambling houses full. Kafilogon kamato? Bengaya it? Drink? Be merry? For tomorrow we die. Yeah, Dakota high key and son, jab extreme trauma, face karta. High, toe. Whoa, due direction, lashakta high, yato, or ziada religious, ya, or ziada reckless, or fear famine bia, gaye. Itni population margay thei farmlands deserted the food supply gay survivors at a looting shuro kardi. Chote gangs ban gay Joe plague struck towns. Loot cart. Kahi. Jagape to graveyards. Be looted hue, log corpses, K capped. Or jewelry. Chura leet. Matlab plague. Kibod civilization. Kua mask. Utah. Gayatha. Or Enderka primal survival instinct expose Hogaya tomb. Agar wahan Tahia subtumhari daily life hotiak. Egel din townwide dance frenzy. Teaser din looting or starvation. or background my church bells non-stop budget horror soundtrack. Hisabati, Rat Leakin, The Surf Shuro at Thee, Europe Key, Demog Key Madness, Abi Peak, Pei Nahi, Geethi, Age, Eta High, Woe, Door, Jism, Fear of Women, Sex, or Satan, Combine Hua, or Bana Woe, Cheese, Jiska, Nam, Sunk Aj, Belog, Shivercart, Hain, The Great Witch Craze. Picture this. Tumek Chot, Medieval Village my ho. Rot Kataimhai. Gar my log candle K. Ozpays, Hain, or Bahar, Hawa. Say trees, Hilarehi, Hain, Koi cat, loudly meow, Carty high, or Tumhar, neighbors Tarant, whisper cart Hain, the witch kafemular high. Matlabek, random cat bee, Kissy key, death sentence, Ban Shukti Thi, or Yahise Sharu, Hota. High Wodor, Jism, witches, Europe, K, biggest villains, Bangay. Plague keyboard log already broken or traumatized the Harbura. Event KO. Supernatural explanation. Dina Unk. Laizi solution. Bangaya. Witch Tamhara. Cowdude. Nahi Daraha. Witch Matlab Sab problem. Ka scapegoat. Ek High. Kissy Ni, Magic Kia. Or Fear. Enter Hota. Hayek bestseller book. Malifa Kiram. The Hammer of Witches. 1487. My publish Hui. The book basically Ek. How to Hunt a Witch for Dummies. Manual Thi. Isna Europe Kofirko Bracket Fueldedia. Author. Ni Laika. Witches, mostly women. Hotihain. Kunky women. Supposedly Ziyada weak. Or lustful. Hotihain. Matlab book. Ni misogyny. Ko legal stamped idea. Or fear say Sab go on. Or towns my witch trials. Boom. Hoge. Torture methods. Broanka. Imagination. Ectum horror movie level thaw. Racks. Thumbscrews. Hot irons. Water dunking. Or EK infamous test. Agar suspect Kopani. My Dalo or woe float Kerto which I gotta doob Jato innocent leakin. Guess what? Don't know case my dead. It's like a lose-lose situation with bonus pain. Or confession. Torture K under Harkoi Kutch. B confess Cardiga. Or Yahi confession Ka cycle. Or B Oriton KO. Drag Kar Lita Tha Ekni. Torture my Bolahan Mainwich Hoon. Or Mir. Soth, the Bihai. Result. Dusra. Bifos. Gaia. Is Terra pure communities. Katam Hoge. Or Sobs. Twisted part. Which hunts Ka. Business model. Tha. Judges, or inquisitors. Pays Kame the trials or executions K through. Property confiscated. Hoti Thi. Or witness KO rewards. Milt the Matlab which craze ek pura corruption. Or profit machine ban. Gaya.aur. Sex panic. Oh bye. Church authorities. K Hisab. Say witches Ka ultimate crime Tha. Satan K. Soth. Sex Karna. Manuals my details Liha Geka witches midnight my devil ku. Soth orgies. Kartihain. Usk hoofed feet. Kokis Kartihain. Or babies. Sacrifice Kartihain. Matlab Joe. Cheese. Sabziata. Scary. Or titillating. Hoshakti Thi. Unhon Usko. Highlight Kia. Or society is. Or obsessed. Ho. Gay. I. Think about it. Plague Kabod. Europe. Koek. Villain. Chehitha. Or Unhon Benia. The witch. Kim edge Jaherfilage Kalog relate Karse. Ek. Old woman. Alone ready. High herbs. Use Karti high. Weird Logti high. Boom. Witch. Or fear. Trial. Torture. Fire. Numbers. Historians estimate Carthain K. 40,000 to 60,000. Witches. K. O Europe. My Burnya. Execute Kea. Matlab Pori populations erase Hogei. Or irony. Joe women apney villages my healers Hodi Thi. Joe herbs or midwifery Janti Thi. Wahi. Subsiziada. Target Hui. Knowledge or independence. Kothret Managaya. Or Tumak. AK. Dark Detail Dune. Which, Hunters K proofs my sobs bizarre test ya tha suspect. Kasharier pay witches mark thun. Matlab. Koi Mo. birthmark, Yasgar, Auragar, Mila, proof K, Tum Satan K, Sath contract, my ho. Bro, imagine ek, Chota, say pimple, Tum Hari, death warrant, Ban J, or Isses, Crazy surf, Oriton KO, Nahi, Bauki, Bachin, KO, B, Target, Kio, Geneva, my, Ekwits trial, Ta Jahan X Milan, Yerold Gobernkar, Dia Gaya, because USNs supposedly confess Kia K, Woe Devil K, Orgy, my Gaia, Tha Matlab, Trauma Ni Sab Rationality, Destroy Car, Dthi.par, yeah, Sab, Surf Rural Villages, QA Issue Nahi, Tha, Kings, Queens, or Popes B Witch Hunts, Co-Support Car, Rehi, the Royal Courts, my witchcraft accusations, power struggles, Ka weapon ban, Gayek, Rival KO, Atanahai, Best Witchcraft Kyle Lago, or Crowd Ready, Tha Believe, Karn K, LIYE, .AUR, Sabs, Scary Part, Witch Hunts Random, or Unstoppable, the Tum Apni Go on my Shanti, Say Ho, or Kal Tum Pik Kar, Lia Jayiga, Ek, Baseless Accusation, Pay, or Tumhara, Sara Go on, Tumhari, Screams Sunega, Torture Chamber Say, Matlab Plague, K Bajo, Survival Anxiety, Thi, Usin, Witches K, Nam Pay, Terra, Ka, Industrial System Create Cardia Tum, Lagda Hai, the Sabhora Kepik, Tha, Nahi Bai, which craze Niek or Doorway Kola, medieval obsession with Satan himself, Abelog Surf Witches, Ko Nahi Balki, Satan K, Armies Ko Dekni, Lage Everywhere, Soak, Kideko, Plague or Witch Hunts Keyboard, Log Already Maximum Paranoia Mode, my the, or Fear Church, Nyunk Demog, my Ek or Nuclear Level, Thought Inject Cardia, Satan, Tumhar, Ospas, Goom, Rahaha, Hi, or Uskpas, Tumhar, Demog, KO Control, Karnki Power, Hi, ABEK, Simple Fever, EK Nightmare, Yakoi Mental Breakdown, B-Proof Ban, Gaia, Key Devil, Ni Tumhar, Andergoose, Cardance, Sharu, Cardaya, Hi Tumhari, Apni, Thoughts, Trust Nahi Karni, Tumhari Desires, Suspicious, Tumarta Body, K, Control Lose, Wa, Devil Possession, Matlab Life, EK, Non-Stop Horror Film, Bangay, The, Jahan Villain Tumhara, High Brain High, or Yahi Say Birth, Hoti, High Exorcism Industry, Priests or Monks Suddenly Celebrity Bangay, Kyunki Wolog, Possessed Victims KO Treat Cart, The Exorcism Sessions, Pure Theater, Hot the Latin Chants, Holy Water, Cross-Waving, or Dramatic Convulsions. Imagine Tamak Gown, Kavilagia, Ho, or Tumher, Psalm Ekladki, Florpay, Thirak, Rahi, Hi-Highs, Breakdance, Ho, Rahi, Ho, or Priest, Chilla, Raha, Hi, I command you, Satan, leave this body. Crowd K, Lie the Ek-Free Netflix show, FA, or Devil Obsession, Surf Villages, TAC Limited, Nahi, Thi, Courts, Universities, or Royal Families. B, is Paranoia, My Faz Gay, Ek, King KO, Agerkoi, Bad Dream, Atato, Poor Castle, My Exorcists, Boulay, Yate, Ek Queen, Kabacha, Agar Bimar, Padato, Tarant Witch, or Devil Donope Blame. Matlab Ruling Class B, Same Level Pay Freakout Car, Rahatha Highs, Ek Common Farmer, or Tumhe Ek, or Twisted Detail Dune. Medieval Europe Niek, New Job Create Kia, Professional Demonologist. The Log Claim Cart, The Kiwo Devil, or Usk Demons, Key Maps, Bannet, Hain, Ekdemoncons, Vaiskele Responsible, Haikons, Symbol Kandarata, Haikons, Ritual, Sibulaya, Jashokta Hai, Ektara Kapok, Mon, Guidebook Leakin, Hellk Creatures K Lie, Orlog Genuinely Believe, Cart the K on Demons, Say, contract possible, HAI.AB. Imagine Caro, Tum, Ek. Medieval student Ho, Paris University, Mike or Tumhara. Professor, lecture de Raha Hai, class, Ajhum, study Karinj, K. Asmodeus, Kanhai or Uska. Favorite sin, Kai Hai. MATLAB, Uncasyllabus, literally demonology, Hota, THA.AUR. Yeah, devil craze. Or B, dangerous Ho, Gaia Jab, politics, my goose, Gaia, wars, famines, or plagues. Sab devil key schemes, Ki Nampe. Justify Kia Gaia. Ek army key, defeat Ka. Blame rival nation, Ki witches, or demons, Pelagda, or church Nabola Agar Hum. Devil Kakilaf. Fight Karahi Hain. Toher. Brutality justified. High MATLAB Europe ni apni Sarivayanskayo. Grand Cosmic War Kanampe excuse. Banalio, or Tumlagda. Hoga K. Logbus believe. Karthik Nahi, Broan Hone experience Mess hysteria. Kakisa's hair. Jaga. Ek convent, my sorry nuns, suddenly. Ek, high time pay, scream Karn Logi, walls pay, Chadney Logi, or Ken Logi, Key Devil, unpossessed Karaha, high, towns my log, Eksoth, faint hote, twitch cart, or claim cart, K unhone, Satan Ko, Deka high, yeah sab. Psychological contagion, tha. Leakin USS, whacked logon, K li ya proof tha. Devil literally, Unk beach, my walk car, Raha high, or ya obsession. Ek or cheese, Ko fuel, Karta high, satanic packs. Yani tum devil K, soft deal. Karto, power K, lie. Ek simple saya trope, Bangaya kissini. Achanak wealthia knowledge. Gin Kia, proof K, USN devil K, Oapna, Solbek Daya, or guess what? Isai stories, Europe K. Viral content, the Har Tavern, or Fire Pit Paylog, Gossip Cart. Kaya Suna, Us Blacksmith, Kaya Bore Mai, Uska Hammer Cabby, Miss Nahi Karda, Paka Devil, Contract High. Or Ice's obsession ni art or literature, KOB, Corrupt Kardaya. Paintings my devil Ko detail my draw Kia Gaia, horns, claws, goat legs. Plays or morality tales, my devil X central character, Ban Gaia, Joe audience Kia Som, bargaining, Karta High, Matlap Europka. Pure imagination. Hijack Gaia, or Joe Sobs. Chilling part high. Yeah devil obsession logon. K under K. Dark desires. Kamiratha. Society openly aptly fierce, lusts, or secret fantasies, Ko devil, K, Nampe, project Karahai, Thi. Agar kisi ko sexual urge hui, blame the devil. Agar kisi Ko greed hue, blame the devil. Matlab har taboo, Ko safe banan, K layak. Scapegoat create Kia Gaia, or US scapegoat Ka Nam. Tha Satan.aur. ISS obsession Ka ultimate result. Mass. Executions or purges justified, Ho gay. Koi B descent, Koi B question, Koi B difference, equals devil ka influence. MATLAB Europe EK. Total paranoia state. Bangaya. Tha Jahan Tum. Survive Karn. K Lai Apni. High thoughts, say Dosti, Todni Padithi. Or yeah surf Europe. TAC limited. Nahi Ha. Colonization K. Time. My Europeans ni ya devil obsession. Export Kia Har. Jaga. America, my Salem witch trials. Same Europe, QA imported devil craze. Africa or Asia, my missionaries ni same fear plant Kia. Matlap devil, Ek, global passport holder Bangaya, or Tum Soha, Rahi. Hojkaya, Hiakraze. Kabiruktahai, Han. Leakin Usk Peach, Ek or Bada. Twist High Joe, or Be Shocking High. Agar, Tum Samish Teho. K Europe. Ka, Devil Craze, Surf Faith, or Superstition Key. Waja Segro. Hua, Totum. Boet Body Cheese. Miss Karehi Ho. Kyunki asli mastermind surf religious paranoia nahi tha. Nahi bro. Yeah, pyro game thought. Rulers or priests. Ni devil. K-Nam. KOek. Nuclear level weapon. Bana Daya. Apnea authority KO. Secure. Karn K Lai. Soke Deco. Ek King KAPO's apnea subjects. Pay control. KA Sabs Batatool. KO High. Fear. Or USS Whacked Sabs Bada. Fear. Kayatha Kai. Tum Satan personally target Kar Raha High. Matlapagar King. Yachach. Tum Hebol. Kajo Hamket. Hain Wahi. Karo. Warna Deva. Tumhara. Sole. Chayagatum. Resistance Korocha. Impossible. Yeah. Fear Ek. Invisible army Haisa. Tha Jo Kisi be soldier. Say Ziada. Effective Tha. Or Yahi Waja. Thiki. Witch trials or exorcisms. Kabi random events. Nahi Hatha. Boet cases my ink Pichek. Political motive Hota. Example. Agara cooler. Kayo. Apni enemies say Chutkara. Chahi Hota. Ta Hun He. Which is Yadavelka. Agents declare. Karwa. Dita. Aur Purgawan. Kasamne Unko. Beren Karwa Dita. Log Samashte the key. Justice Ho. Raha Hai. Leakin Asli. My Ek power purge. Chal. Raha Hota. Ek. Or dark twist. Church versus state. Kach. Keskame. Kabi King's priests. Kayasoth team. Bannet. The Tumlog devil K. Against Fightkarn KLI church. KO pays due. Or Hum Tumhari kingdom. KO god. KO protection. My racked Hain. Matlab. Holy tax. Or Kabi King's priests. K against Fightcart. Ike Dusterpay. Satanic corruption K charges Lagwa Deet. Yani Devilak trump card Bangaya. Politics Ka or Sep's manipulative move. Tha controlling women through devil fear. Patriarchal rulers or church dono ni witches. K concept. KOUs. Karkek. Key Cineforce. Key obedience. I got Ek. Aurat. Outspoken. Hoti. Strong Hoti. Yes society Knorms. Toti Sita label. Milta. Devil key agent. Or log believe. Kart kunki. Already unk. DOA. Demog. My devil ka narrative. Seed car. Diagaya. Dadai. Is terra power structures ni apni control. KO eternal bana. Liya.aurek. Or shocking cheese. Devil obsession money printing machine. B tha. Har exorcism. Har witch trial. Ek ritualistic theater. Hota Jo Login. KO attract Karda. Or Isis theater. Key. Lie fees charge Hoti. Priests. KO gifts. Rulers KO fines. Or executioners KO salaries Milty. Matlab log. Ekt. Teroff. Devil say dare. Rehi. The Orducery Teroff. Unka dare. Directly rulers. KO coffers. Phil Kar. Rahatha. Fear KO. Literal monetization. Or Broek. Or detail Suno Jo. Or be twisted high. Kutch rulers deliberately devil hysteria. KO escalate cart. The Jabunki governance. Fail Hoti Thi. Famine. Blame witches. War defeat. Blame Satan. Plague. Blame devil. Matlab. Osli. Problems K. Lie accountability. Avoid Karn. K ultimate scapegoat. Bonadaya Gaia. Ek. Unseen enemy. Log rulers. KO. Blame Karn. Kabajaya Banai. High neighbors. KO blame. Kart. Yani. Divide and rule. Devil edition. Or Ya. Surf. Local politics. Nahi Thoth. International level pay. B-Devil. Ek. Propaganda weapon. The Protestant or Catholic wars Katai Maidano sides. Ikadasar Kayo Satan Kapapit. Declare Kartik. Posters. Sermons. Or plays my rival armies KO. Demonic symbols. KO Soth portray KO Yata. Matlab Tum battlefield. Payak Dusser. KO swords. Samar Rehiho. Or propaganda battlefield. Pay Tum. Ek Dusser K. O literal devils. Bana Rehiho. .aur. Joe Sabs bone chilling. Cheese high. Devil K. Nampe Joe. B violence. Hota tha. Uska. Moral justification. Guaranteed hota. Imagine king adalah pura gaon berengkaruadia. Normal. Log. Protes karta. Looking agar bola gaya ka. Yagoan witches. Were satin K worshippers. Ka tato. Suddenly violence geholiak. Matlab cruelty. Ko sanctity. K-mask, my rap. Car dia gaya.aur is pure game my losers con, the common people. Woe villagers, Joe ek dusserpay, suspicion card. Woe women, Joe independent dict, high devil, ka tag laletti. Or woe minorities, Joe eleg. Faith follow cart. Power kai lai rulers, or priests. Neonk lives ko disposable banadaya. Or ab, sachoek, society Joe. Already plague or famine, say crippled high, usko, or weaken karn ka, easiest way tha, paranoia. Log cabby, unite nahi, karpa, rulers, k, against, kyunki, unapna, high neighbor, devo ka, agent lagda tha. Or yeah, exactly wahi tha Joe elites, chait the .aur, agar, tomla, lagda high, yeah, sab, medieval Europe, qa issue, tha. Bro. Reality, or be disturbing high. Kyunki Joe power tactics. USS whacked use hui, wahi playbook. Modern era. My B. Repeat, hoti high. Bus devil kanam, replace kardu terrorist, tritor. Jai enemy of the state say. Mechanism, same high. Fear create caro. Enemy invisible banao. Or fear power justify caro. So you've stuck around. Good. That tells me two things about you. First, you're not squeamish. And second, you're way too curious for your own good. Dangerous combination. But hey, that's exactly the kind of person who survives in the medieval world. Now remember how I said we'd start with a ruler, whose obsession with death turned into a full-blown performance. Let me introduce you to King Peter of Castile. Better known as Peter the Cruel. Yeah, imagine being so infamous that history literally slaps the cruel after your name. That's not a great Yelp review for a king, right? But let me paint you the scene. It's 1350s Spain. The Black Death is making house calls across Europe like some kind of unsolicited, door-to-door salesman of doom. Half the continent is coughing itself into mass graves. And while everyone else is praying, panicking, or pickling themselves in wine, Peter, he's sharpening knives. You see, Peter didn't just execute people, he curated executions. He staged them the way you'd stage a play. If he wanted to send a message to his nobles, he wouldn't just order a hanging. No. He'd host a banquet, invite everyone to eat, drink, and gossip and casually have one of the guests dragged out and butchered in the middle of the feast. Talk about killing the vibe. Literally now. Body counts in wars. That's expected. Everyone was stabbing everyone else in the Middle Ages. But Peter's body count was personal. His court looked more like a revolving door of paranoia than a palace. He suspected betrayal everywhere and honestly, sometimes he wasn't wrong. Nobles in that era plotted against their kings, the way modern people plot against their Wi-Fi providers, constantly. But Peter's solution? Kill first. Ask questions later. There's this story that he had his own half-brother, Frederic, executed after luring him into a false sense of security. They met up, supposedly to reconcile, hugged it out in front of everyone, very sweet, very holy. Then, bam, Peter ordered his guards to slaughter him on the spot. Nothing says family bonding like fratricide, am I right? But here's where it gets truly medieval, in the worst way. Peter didn't stop at nobles. He loved a good public spectacle. Once, he ordered the mass execution of dozens of prisoners just to clear the jails. Imagine living in a world where your king treats prisoners like clutter in a closet. Too many lying around, let's make space. That's Peter's version of spring cleaning. And yet this is the part that'll mess with your head. Half of Spain thought he was necessary. Because for every noble he gutted, there were commoners who saw him as a hero. Why? Because he kept taxes lower than his rivals, cracked down on corruption, and, get this, he even enforced justice against nobles who abused peasants. So if you were a poor farmer, Peter's cruelty wasn't cruelty, it was protection. his body count was your shield. Think about that for a second. Imagine being a peasant, standing in the mud, watching heads roll, and actually clapping because, hey, at least this time, it's not your head. That's the twisted psychology of the Middle Ages. Cruelty as comfort. But here's where Peter's story takes a sharp, bloody twist. His paranoia eventually caught up with him. He'd made so many enemies, executed so many people, brothers, cousins, nobles, clergy, that eventually his enemies ganged up and said, "Okay, enough. This guy has to go." And who do they rally behind? Another one of his half-brothers, because apparently, in medieval Spain, family reunions always ended in stabbings. The war that followed wasn't just about thrones, it was about revenge. His half-brother Henry hunted him down, chased him across castles and countrysides, until, finally, they cornered him. And here's the poetic justice part. Peter the Cruel was killed in a 1-on-1 duel with Henry, stabbed to death. No banquet, no stage, just raw, dirty, up-close death. And you know what Henry was nicknamed afterward? Henry the Fratricidal. Yeah, because in the Middle Ages, apparently, if you didn't kill your sibling, you weren't trying hard enough. So let's pause here. What's Peter's body count? Hard to say. Some chroniclers claim hundreds, others claim thousands. But honestly, the exact number doesn't matter. What matters is the vibe he left behind. He turned kingship into theater. He proved that in the medieval world, cruelty wasn't just about wiping out threats. It was about spectacle, about reminding everyone, every day, that their lives dangled on a thread end. He was the one holding the scissors. Now, here's the question I want you to sit with. Was Peter the Cruel really a monster, or was he just a product of his time? Because when you think about it, the medieval throne was basically a survival game where the only rule was kill or be killed. And if Peter was cruel, what do we even call the rulers who came after him? Because oh buddy Peter is just the warm-up act. If his court was bloody, the next ruler we're stepping into makes Peter look like a cranky school principal. This guy didn't just keep a body count, he collected it, polished it, and wore it like jewelry. He wanted his enemies to remember him, not for mercy, not for wisdom, but for being the walking embodiment of death itself. And the craziest part, you've heard of him, guaranteed. He's one of those names that pops up in history class, all regal and dramatic, and your teacher probably brushed over his violent phase like it was just a footnote. But tonight, I'm going to take you into the dark side of his reign, the part you were never supposed to know, the part where the body count stops being numbers and starts becoming legend. So, do you think you're ready to meet him? Because once I say his name, there's no going back. All right, you made it to section 3, which means you're officially hooked. And trust me, you should be, because this is where the story goes from wow, that's harsh to okay, I'm starting to question whether medieval rulers were even human. Now, remember how I said Peter the Cruel was basically the opening band? Well, the headliner is walking onto the stage now. His name, Vlad III of Wallachia. You might know him by his far more metal nickname, Vlad the Impaler. And yeah, if you're thinking, wait, is this the Dracula guy? Bingo. But here's the thing, school history books and even pop culture gave you the PG-13 version of him. What they don't tell you is that Vlad's body count wasn't just height, was creative. He wasn't satisfied with just killing. Oh no, Vlad wanted his victims to suffer in ways that made entire empires hesitate before messing with him. So, let's set the stage. Mid-1400s, Eastern Europe, Wallachia, little slice of land stuck between hungry empires, the Ottoman Turks on one side, the Hungarians on the other. It was basically the medieval equivalent of living between two heavyweight boxers who used your house as a punching bag. Now, most rulers in that position would try diplomacy. Maybe bribe one side, ally with the other, sign some peace treaties, call it a day. Not Vlad. Vlad looked at the geopolitical map and thought, nah, I'll just scare the living soul out of both sides until no one dares knock on my door. Enter the impalements. If you've got a weak stomach, here's your warning. Impalement wasn't just stabbing someone. No. It was a slow, gruesome process, where a sharpened wooden stake was inserted into the body, usually through the rear, and carefully pushed until it came out through the chest, shoulder, or even the mouth. And here's the kicker. Done correctly, the victim didn't die immediately. They could live for hours, even days, squirming on that pole like some nightmare version of a kebab. Now imagine hundreds of these victims, all lined up along the roads, swaying in the wind. That's the welcome sign Vlad gave to his enemies. In 1462, when the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II marched into Wallachia with an army of over 100,000 men, they expected to crush Vlad easily. Instead, what they found left even these hardened warriors shaken. Reports say they stumbled upon what became known as the Forest of the Impaled. Picture this: 20,000 Ottoman prisoners, impaled and arranged like a twisted graveyard of human spikes, stretching as far as the eye could see. Think about that for a second. 20,000 bodies. And here's the most insane part: Mehmed himself, the man who conquered Constantinople, reportedly turned back after seeing it. Imagine being so terrifying that the conqueror of one of the greatest cities in history looks at your yard decorations and says, "Nope, not today." Now you're probably thinking, why? Why go to such horrific lengths? The answer lies in medieval psychology. Vlad wasn't insane. Well, not just insane. He understood fear as a weapon. He didn't have the money, manpower, or resources to fight massive armies. But he had cruelty. And cruelty, when publicized correctly, was worth more than any army. But here's where the story gets messier. Was Vlad a sadist? Or was he a patriot? Because, and this is the part history books gloss over, many of his own people actually adored him. To them, Vlad wasn't a monster. He was the ruler who protected Wallachia from being swallowed alive by empires. He was the guy who punished corrupt nobles, who cracked down on thieves, who made it possible for a peasant to walk through the land with a gold coin in hand and not get robbed. There's this one legend: Vlad placed a golden cup in the middle of a public square, just left it there. Anyone could have stolen it. But no one dared, because they knew what would happen if they did. Impalement, and the cup. It stayed there untouched. So let's put you in those shoes. If you were a peasant, barely surviving harvest after harvest, wouldn't you trade mercy for safety? Wouldn't you say, "Sure, my king impales people? But hey, at least no one's raiding my house at night"? It's twisted, right? But that's the genius and horror of medieval rulers, like Vlad. Their body counts weren't just about killing enemies. They were about crafting fear so strong it became protection. Of course, not everyone saw him as a hero. The Saxon merchants hated him. The Ottomans despised him. Even his Hungarian allies betrayed him. To them, Vlad was a demon in human form. And maybe he was. His own nickname in Wallachia: Epi. The Impale. They didn't call him that behind his back. They called him that to his face. Like it was a title of honor. And here's something to chew on. Vlad's reputation became so legendary that when Bram Stoker wrote Dracula centuries later, he borrowed Vlad's name and some of his aura. But the actual history, way bloodier than the vampire stories. Because Dracula drinks blood in novels. Vlad spilled it in rivers. So, what's the body count here? Historians argue anywhere from 40,000 to 100,000 people. Let that sink in. A single man ruling a small, battered territory, racking up numbers that rival modern wars. And every single one of those deaths carried a message. Mess with Wallachia. And this is what happens. Now, let me ask you something. If you lived back then, and you saw those forests of impaled bodies with your own eyes, would you think Vlad was a monster? Or would you whisper prayers of thanks that he was your monster, not someone else's? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Cruelty wasn't just survival in the Middle Ages. It was currency, and rulers like Vlad, the Impaler, minted that currency in blood. But Vlad, oh, he's not even the peak of our list, not by a long shot. Because if you thought forests of impaled corpses were extreme, wait until you hear about the ruler who killed, not for survival, not for politics, not even for spectacle, but for fun. Yes, you heard me right. Fun. Entertainment. Like a medieval hobby. And if you think I'm exaggerating, just wait until Section 4, because I'm about to introduce you to the ruler whose bloody pastimes make Vlad look like a grim accountant. So far, we've seen kings who killed for drama, for fear, or for fun. But what if I told you there was a ruler who killed for order? No madness, no theatrics. Just cold, methodical elimination. The kind of killing where you don't even flinch you. Just tick another box on your to-do list. That ruler, Ivan IV, of Russia, better known as Ivan the Terrible. And let me stop you right there. Terrible didn't mean bad at his job. Nope. In Old Russian Grozny meant something closer to the formidable. The fearsome, or basically, the guy you really, really don't want to piss off. Spoiler. A lot of people pissed him off now. Ivan's story starts like a tragic fairy tale. He lost his father when he was 3. His mother, who tried to act as regent, was allegedly poisoned when he was 8. From there, boy Ivan was raised by rival boyar nobles who treated him less like a prince and more like a chew toy. Humiliated, beaten, ignored, he grew up watching cruelty up close. And when he finally took full power, he made sure everyone paid for it. Ivan didn't just inherit Russia. He reshaped it, centralized power, expanded territory, crushed rivals. Sounds great on paper, but the way he enforced his rule, that's where the body count skyrockets. Let me introduce you to his personal death squad, the Oprychniki Imagine. A mix between the KGB, a biker gang, and a cult, all dressed in black robes, riding black horses, carrying dog heads and brooms on their saddles. Why dog heads? To symbolize sniffing out treason. Why brooms? To sweep away enemies. Subtlety was not their thing. The Oprychniki followed Ivan's orders to the letter and those orders were often wiped this city off the map. One of the darkest examples, the massacre of Novgorod in 1570. Ivan suspected the city of Novgorod was plotting to defect to Lithuania. Was there proof? Probably not. Did Ivan care? Absolutely not. He marched in with his Oprychniki and unleashed a bloodbath that lasted 5 weeks. Picture it: men, women, children, dragged out of homes, tied up, tortured, drowned in the frozen Volkhov River. Entire monasteries looted and monks executed. Fires spreading through the city. Chroniclers estimate anywhere between 10,000 and 60,000 people killed for one suspected betrayal. That's not madness. That's not even rage. That's logistics. That's Ivan sitting down, calculating, and deciding mass slaughter was the most efficient solution. And yet here's where the story twists. As always, Ivan also saw himself as God's chosen ruler. He prayed constantly, built churches, and sometimes paused executions to ask priests if what he was doing was holy. Spoiler: the priests usually said yes. In medieval Russia, when the Tsar asked if killing was holy, you nodded. But Ivan's cruelty wasn't reserved just for his enemies. It spilled into his personal life. In one of the most infamous moments of his reign, Ivan, during a violent argument, struck his own son, Ivan Ivanovich, with his staff. The blow was fatal. The heir to the throne lay dead, his skull crushed by his father's rage. There's even a painting by Ilya Repin, capturing the horror. Ivan the Terrible, cradling his dying son, his face twisted in agony. It's one of history's most haunting images of regret. So let's take stock. By the time Ivan died in 1584, his reign had left Russia expanded, but scarred. Its population reduced by wars, famines, and purges. Body count. Historians estimate hundreds of thousands, maybe more. But the exact number is slippery, because Ivan's killings weren't always recorded as atrocities. Sometimes, they were written down as justice, or God's will, or just plain silence. And that's the terrifying part. Vlad wanted people to see his impaled forests. Peter wanted nobles to whisper about his betrayals. Charles left chaos behind, but Ivan wanted his killings normalized, ordinary, forgettable. He wanted bloodshed to blend into the fabric of governance so seamlessly that no one would question it. Now, here's the kicker. While Ivan was terrifying, he also laid the groundwork for Russia's future as a centralized state. Without his ruthless consolidations, the empire we know later under the Romanovs might not have existed. So again, monster or builder, tyrant or visionary, the medieval world blurs that line until you can't tell the difference. And here's something that'll keep you up at night. Every time you see Moscow's St. Basil's Cathedral's beautiful onion domes, you're looking at Ivan's legacy, a man remembered both for creating breathtaking architecture and rivers of blood. The two are inseparable. So let me ask you, if you lived under Ivan and you saw the Oprichniki ride past your house, dogheads swinging from their saddles, would you see justice? Or would you see death knocking at your door? Because Ivan wasn't just terrible. He was inevitable. But don't exhale yet. Because if Ivan killed with precision, the next medieval figure we're diving into killed with passion, not cold logic, not fleeting madness. Passion, raw, burning. Obsessive passion that led to one of the bloodiest sprees in medieval aristocratic history. And here's a hint, it wasn't a king. It wasn't even a man. Yeah, you heard me. The next body count belongs to a woman, and she might just be the scariest of them all. So you've seen what kings can do with armies, paranoia, and death squads. But what happens when cruelty isn't a political tool, or a wartime strategy, or even a symptom of madness? What happens when killing becomes a personal obsession, a private indulgence? Enter Elizabeth Bathory, the woman history remembers as the Blood Countess. Now, you've probably heard whispers of her before. She's the kind of figure who shows up in ghost stories, gothic novels, maybe even in the weirder corners of YouTube conspiracy videos. The rumors say she bathed in blood to preserve her youth, that her castle was basically a slaughterhouse, that she killed so many girls she makes Vlad's impaled forests look like a backyard barbecue. But how much of it is true? That's the deliciously terrifying part. Let's rewind to 16th century Hungary. Elizabeth was a noblewoman born into ridiculous wealth and power. The kind of family where everyone has a title, land, soldiers, and at least 3 cousins who are cardinals. In the church, she was married off young, as was custom, to a powerful nobleman named Ferenc Nadasdy. Together, they became a medieval power couple except, instead of matching Instagram outfits, they had matching reputations for cruelty. Ferenc, often away fighting the Ottomans, was notorious for torturing prisoners of war, and Elizabeth, left at home in the family castle, she had her own hobbies. Here's where the stories get dark. Really dark. Elizabeth allegedly began luring young peasant girls into her service with promises of work at the castle. Sometimes, they were brought in as maids. Sometimes, they were just unfortunate enough to cross her path. And once inside, few ever left alive. The tales of her cruelty are grotesque. Girls beaten until their flesh turned black and blue. Others starved, frozen, or burned. Some reports claim she bit chunks out of their faces. Others say she drove needles under their fingernails. And yes, the infamous rumor that she bathed in the blood of virgins, believing it kept her skin youthful. Now, pause. That's such a lurid detail, it almost feels too sensational, right? Did Elizabeth really dunk herself in buckets of blood like some twisted medieval spa day? Historians debate it. Some argue the bloodbath story was exaggerated by her enemies to make her crimes sound even more demonic. Others say there was just enough truth in it to spark centuries of legend. But here's the thing that can't be denied. Girls were disappearing by the dozens, then by the hundreds. Neighbors started whispering. Priests noticed families weeping over missing daughters. And eventually, even the Hungarian king couldn't ignore the rumors that Castle Szighet had become a graveyard. So how many victims are we talking about? The number varies wildly. Some records say a few dozen. Others say over 600. Let that sink in. 600 human lives, snuffed out behind castle walls, and unlike Vlad or Ivan, Elizabeth didn't need armies or political excuses. Her body count wasn't about ruling a nation or defending a throne. It was personal, intimate. A grotesque obsession, dressed up as routine. Now, here's where it gets extra chilling. When Elizabeth was finally investigated, the officials didn't just find rumors. They found survivors. Broken, battered girls who escaped the castle told stories of nightmarish torture chambers. They found evidence corpses buried around the property, secret rooms smeared with blood. This wasn't paranoia. This was real batand. This is the part that'll make your blood boily. Elizabeth wasn't just some random noblewoman. She was a battery, one of the most powerful families in Eastern Europe, which meant you couldn't just drag her into court like a common criminal. Oh no. Her trial was delicate, political, and very, very messy. Witnesses testified. Servants confessed. The list of atrocities piled higher and higher. But instead of executing her, the authorities chose a compromise. Why? Because executing a Bathory risked starting a noble revolt. So what did they do? They walled her up. Literally. Elizabeth was bricked into a small room in her own castle, no windows, no door, just a slit for food. And there she stayed, for 4 years, until she died. Alone, entombed in stone. Like the monster everyone believed her to be. Now let's talk about psychology for a second. Why did Elizabeth do it? Was it madness? Sadism? A warped sense of science, believing blood could restore youth? Or was it something darker? Something that lived in the medieval mind, where superstition and cruelty fed off each other? Because here's what fascinates me. Elizabeth wasn't hiding her crimes that well. Neighbors knew, priests knew, even peasants whispered about it. And yet, it went on for years. Why? Because she was powerful. Because she was noble. Because, in the Middle Ages, power gave you a license to kill. Think about it. If Elizabeth had been a poor peasant woman torturing girls, she'd have been burned at the stake in a heartbeat. But as a countess, she got away with it for decades. And here's the haunting takeaway. Elizabeth's story shows that medieval body counts weren't always about public terror, like Vlad's forests or Ivan's massacres. Sometimes they were private, hidden, the kind of cruelty that happens in shadows, where power protects monsters until they go too far. So now I'm going to turn this question to you. If you lived in that village, and your daughter was offered work at Castle Siegit, would you risk saying no to the Countess? Would you dare insult her power? Or would you send your child, praying the rumors were just rumors? That's the trap Elizabeth sets, the cruelest of all. And just when you think medieval rulers can't get darker than this, trust me, we're still climbing. Because while Elizabeth turned cruelty into a private obsession, the next figure turned it into a public ritual. That's right. A ruler whose body counts weren't hidden away in castles, but paraded, celebrated, and even worshipped by their people. And once you hear their story, you'll realize medieval cruelty didn't just shape fear, it shaped faith.